Welcome back to the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle with Ross and Calum. We're a little bit delayed from when we usually record after big events. We like to get a podcast out on the Monday or Tuesday right after they've happened. But we had an interview with William Tackett, former ADCC Trials winner, to preview the ADCC West Coast Trials that are happening at the end of March. If you've got any interest in ADCC Trials, if you've got any interest in competition jiu-jitsu, it's an interview that you should definitely listen to. There's loads of good advice and insight into what it takes to get through an ADCC Trials, one of the most grueling events that you can take part in grappling. And even if you're just taking that advice and putting it into your local competition where you might have quite a few matches on the day, I think you'll definitely be better for it. So if you like and subscribe and follow, you'll get a notification as soon as the interview's out. It'll be out in the near future. We don't have a specific date for it yet. It's going to come in 2 parts. It's an hour-long chat, very extensive. William's a great source of knowledge. And I like to think Calum and I asked him some interesting questions that provoked some good reactions. So, moving on, there was a load of grappling took place last weekend, as we said. You can always hear the strain in my voice. As I said, there was a load of grappling because it was quite a task to watch it all. But we've done our best, haven't we, Calum?
Yep.
We've inhaled quite a lot, and we've got some opinions to share. The first event, probably the highest profile event that took place last weekend, notwithstanding the fact that ADCC Trials ultimately have quite an important outcome because people are going to go towards the World Championships. But as a standalone event, UFC Fight Pass Invitational had a huge amount of firepower on the card. So, Calum, do you want to run through some of the highlights that you took from the Fight Pass Invitational event?
Yeah, so starting on some of the lower down matches in the card, I think Jonathan Alves versus Jay Rodriguez was a pretty good match to watch. Seeing some people commenting some stuff to do with, purple belt beats black belt world champion, but at the end of the day, J-Rod's been training grappling, wrestling and jiu-jitsu for quite a long time now. Also a little bit bigger than Jonathan, but nonetheless still an impressive performance and victory.
Yep, I thought J-Rod looked really good. It set him up well to go into the West Coast Trials at 88 kilograms, where he's going to be a big threat in the division. The same division that our friend William Tackett's competing in, and it's one that we talk about on that podcast. So that's another shill for the William Tackett conversation. It's going to be upcoming. But J-Rod, always exciting to watch, all action. Great guy to have on a card like Fight Pass Invitational. So what else did you see before we get into the later part of the card? Was there anyone that caught your eye that was in some of the earlier matches?
So I can't remember, was Mason Fowler and Pedro Mourinho, was that on the undercard or was that the main card? That was
I think it was on the main card, but relatively early on in the main card.
Yeah, so that was a good match to watch. Some interesting back and forth on the feet, some cool foot sweeps from Pedro. Eventually, Mason managing to get on top, get past, get the arm triangle sunk in. There was a bit of a controversy, I think, with the reset. I think Pedro was doing a good job defending the arm triangle, and then when they got reset, it kind of was on straight away. He didn't have much of a chance to defend it, but overall good match with 2 guys that have a really good shot of doing really well at 88 kilos in ADCC, presuming Pedro either gets an invite or wins Trials this weekend.
Yeah, we flagged Pedro Mourinho as being one of the main contenders for the under 88 division at the first South American Trials in Belo Horizonte, which took place last weekend, and we'll talk about in a little bit. Pedro didn't do that. He had this match against Mason Fowler. We were kind of wondering when we saw that he was scheduled for both events whether there was some sort of private jet being hired to get him from Belo Horizonte to Las Vegas, but we kind of figured out, no, he's probably going to pull out the first Trials and just put all his eggs in his basket of winning the second Trials, and it looks like that's what he's done. Yeah, that match took place in the mid-card. So I'll refresh your memory of a couple of matches that took place earlier. So there was Ronaldo Jr. against Cody Steele. Again, high-action match. Cody Steele hit a fantastic suplex, but Ronaldo Jr. had the better of the action to take the decision victory. And then we saw Victor Hugo against Roosevelt Souza, and another fantastic performance against Victor Hugo. Calum, does he continue to impress you?
Yeah, definitely. Really looking forward to seeing him at ADCC, and it's going to lead into one of our discussion points towards the end of talking about this fight pass. There's a bit of a power vacuum at the moment up in the heavier weight classes now that Gordon's gone. Kind of guys vying for that title of interim best grappler in the world. So we'll get more into that later down the line, but he's definitely one of those guys vying for those spots, and definitely one that can fairly be considered to be up there.
Yeah, so just keep track of the names. It's been Victor Hugo, and there's been Mason Fowler so far. We're going to come back to both of them. Nicholas Meregali had another fantastic performance. He's also in the mix in this discussion that we're going to get onto. He beat former ADCC champion Matheus Diniz in pretty convincing fashion. Calum, do you continue to be impressed by Nicholas Meregali in the no-gi scene?
Yeah, definitely. Looked good in that match, especially when the match got to the ground. It was kind of almost a bit more reactive on the feet. Didn't look like he was actively going for anything too much. He was playing a lot of grabbing the head with collar tie, so maybe he was just looking to exhaust Matheus a little bit in the first half of the match. But it would be good if we saw him actively going for a little bit more takedown-wise, but maybe strategically that was part of the plan to fatigue Matheus and get him to go for sloppy shots or snap downs in that case for that match, and then get on top. And then once the match hit the ground, he looked really good. Didn't get the sub that he called. He gave a bit of a strange explanation for why that was. I don't know if that was the case, or he didn't feel like he could get the arm bar, but yeah, dominant once the match got to the ground, definitely.
Another big boy, Nick Rodriguez against Roberto Jimenez. You'd mentioned before you thought Roberto's style of grappling can pose and would pose Nicky Rod some issues. Nicky Rod came through and won the match, but I think you were right in your assessment beforehand that Roberto's a tricky customer for Nicky Rod to deal with.
Yeah, definitely hard for him to hold down. I think you saw at the end of the match in the post-fight interview, he had to kind of collect his words and collect his breath. He was very tired at the end of that match. I think with some of the heavier guys, he's able to kind of out-quickness them and out-cardio them. That wasn't the case with Roberto. Even though he had a size advantage, Roberto was able to push the pace the whole time. He couldn't ever really kind of pin him down. He got to his body lock at some points, and Roberto did a good job framing away and kept the match moving the whole time, which I think, even though he lost the match, definitely kept it in Roberto's favour.
And your question before the main event, which was Craig Jones against Rafael Lovato Jr., was, would we see classic Craig, leglock Craig, or would we see wrestling Craig that we've seen recently with the instructionals that he's been putting out and some of the MMA-focused training he's been doing with Alexander Volkanovski in particular? We saw classic Craig, very quick leglock.
Yeah, it was good to see that version of Craig again. We're not necessarily seeing that in a while. I think while Craig, obviously we've spoken about Diego Pato potentially being considered the best leg locker in the world. I think that was something Craig was definitely in the consideration for while he was leg locking. So it'd be cool if we see a little bit more of that from Craig again, and then that could provide that interesting discussion. But I think obviously he's been working his wrestling a lot. He's been like going into kind of like the MMA space as far as like his DVD releases, and like he's obviously been coaching some high level UFC fighters. But I think it would be cool now that we've seen some development of Craig's stand-up to merge the two a little bit, because I think the issue with Craig before was like if people engaged in his guard, he would do really well, but people would skirt along the outsides a lot. They wouldn't really engage. So it'd be now nice to see that he's got both those skill sets to use the stand-up to get like a really solid connection and maybe establish a guard as he's going down. So obviously he's comfortable enough on the feet, use that to get good connection, pull right into the legs or right into some sort of entanglement that he can get a submission attempt or a sweep off of. I think that would be cool to see from him in the future, and I think that's definitely something that if he could master, that would really play into his game.
Do you think Craig saw your bold claim that Diego Pato is now the best leg locker in the world, as said in a previous episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle, and he thought, no, I have to prove Calum wrong.
Yeah, or maybe he just wanted to prove he was the second best. Keep that in the public's eye.
What I will say is we've heard a lot from Craig recently about whether he's going to do the ADCC, and the deciding factor could be the cash reward that is available to winners of divisions. I think it's £10,000. It has been, or $10,000. It has been that total. Whether it will be going into these finals, I don't know. But he's suggesting that might not be enough to convince him to take part. And on the one hand, I totally get the argument for increased athlete pay, right? And then on the other hand, I totally understand how expensive it is to run an event as big as the ADCC. And you can take both of those points and say which one you agree with. You can have either side. All I'll say is, if you're arguing for more athlete pay and you get the chance to have an interview after your match to promote yourself, to promote future matches that you're going to have, to promote your appearances on future events, if you waste that interview time by doing pretty cheap slagging off of Nicholas Meregali and then a cliche joke about taking nose beaters, I don't think you're putting yourself in the best position to call for extra money should you win the ADCC world title.
Yeah, I think you'd messaged me something that I wasn't really aware of as well about the Olympics. So you're kind of making the argument that ADCC, they're kind of prestigious enough that if you win that, it's pretty life-changing. And Craig's spoken about it wouldn't potentially make that big of a difference to his career, but obviously the ADCC isn't configuring their whole pay scheme just around Craig Jones. You'd shared it goes different by country to country, but like the amount that a country will pay an Olympic athlete of their nationality to win a gold medal, and it varied quite a lot from nothing from the UK to countries like Estonia and Uzbekistan that pay like a few $100,000 worth. As far as the ADCC, like, yeah, it is pretty life-changing if you win that as far as like a grappling career. So it kind of depends how you want to interpret that. From Craig's point of view, where he is already established and he's like made use of the previous ADCC wins, then like, yeah, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference to his career. But for other people, I definitely think it does.
What Calum's referring to is after Craig's promo, and we were having a little bit of chat about pay for athletes. I said some events are so prestigious that an athlete is willing to take a drop in regular income or no income at all to take part of that event, and I highlighted the Olympics. The UK doesn't pay for medals. What they do is they will give athletes entering the Olympics on their programme a set fee. I think the last one was £36,000 for the year. All athletes get that from central funding, and then should you win a medal at the Olympics, you don't get any extra money from that. Of course, you're then open to getting sponsorships and your profile will increase, etc. Right? But you can still be a competitive athlete and taking part in other events that will pay you more money along the way. So it's not like you're just limited to your 36,000. But if all you did was just train for that Olympic event and then do the Olympic event and then you won it, like that would be your base rate pay. Football, I believe the England football team are paid less than £2,000 a match to represent England. They put that to charity, and then should they win in a major tournament, they're incentivized and they will get some more money, but it's not as much as some of the astronomical sums that they are getting to play for their club. Yet the prestige of playing for their country and the fact that like the World Cup is still the biggest prize in football means that they want to do that. I think Scotland, the players get nothing for matches, and again they're incentivized through tournaments. But how likely is it that Scotland's going to win the World Cup? Pretty unlikely. So those athletes are going to the tournament knowing that, you know, they're likely to only get a certain amount of money. less than they're going to get if they're playing in the English Premier League, but they're still willing to go and play for their country. So my point was that some events are prestigious enough for athletes not to be solely focused on the monetary gain from it. Now, Craig can decide whether the ADCC is that for him or not. I would just argue that he could make that decision after winning gold or after his career's finished. Making the decision right now, I don't think, is the time to make it, because you've not played the whole thing out. So only in retrospect can you look back and decide whether it was worth it or not. So if I was him, I'd go for it. Now, all that said, taking it back to his performance that we're kind of on this call to talk about, I thought the way Craig played that match means he's far likelier to do ADCC. Because I thought he was super switched on, super serious, and went to his strength right away. And I thought that means that that's the Craig we're getting this year.
Yeah, interesting. He's definitely been looking for quick subs in his last few matches, but then that is almost kind of Craig's like strength. He's joked in the past that like if his matches go longer than 3 minutes, he's likely to lose. Obviously, in all good jokes, there's some truth in it. I don't think that's obviously completely the case, but definitely he is very dangerous and strong in the early parts of the match, and we saw in him submitting Lovato that quickly of what he's able to do against ADCC semi-finalist. So yeah, definitely promising from that regard that hopefully he maybe would do ADCC and do pretty well. I think we both agree that he would likely do pretty well if he was to do it. It's just whether or not he does do it, and that's still to be seen.
Calum suggested correctly that we're a way to have a discussion about the power vacuum that now exists in the heavier weight divisions in submission grappling, with the absence of Gordon Ryan, who's taken time out, still having stomach issues, wants to compete at ADCC in the super fight against Yuri Simoes. So while he's out of action and we're not seeing him on Fight Pass or any events of that ilk, who is the king in Gordon Ryan's absence? We've got Craig Jones taking a claim. We've got Nicholas Meregali, Victor Hugo, Mason Fowler has been mentioned. We had Kaynan Duarte, who wasn't on this event, but called out Nicholas Meregali for a rematch of a match they'd had before. Is there anyone else? Nicky Rod is in the mix as well. So out of all those guys, who do you think, Calum, is at the top end of that?
Yeah, I'd probably, off the bat, even though he's gotten a win or two over Craig Jones, I'd probably rule Mason Fowler off of that. A little bit on the smaller end, but also like he's not done that great ADCC compared to some of the other guys on this. And I think you can make somewhat of a claim for any of them. But at the same time, the only guy that's like really won ADCC and won it a couple times is Kaynan, but then obviously Meregali's recently beaten him. So I think if it wasn't for that recent match, the clear-cut guy would definitely be Kaynan, off of like consistency the past 5 years in no-gi performance. Beating Nicky Rod, he's beaten Craig Jones. Obviously got that recent loss to Meregali. So I think the kind of top three guys in that standing, or maybe top four, obviously Craig, Meregali, Nicky Rod, and Kaynan.
Victor Hugo!
Yeah, Victor Hugo.
Beat Nicky Rod!
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's definitely a tough discussion. I'll say my top three out of those then would be Craig, Nicky Rod, Craig, Meregali, and Kaynan. Top two, Kaynan, Meregali. It's a toss-up between the two of them. Obviously, Meregali with the recent win, but Kaynan with the much better profile.
Okay, but Meregali against Craig.
I mean, I think if you were to do this jiu-jitsu math-wise, like you can make a case for any one of them. It's like, okay.
So, that's why it's an interesting topic. So last time Meregali faced Craig, what happened?
Last time Meregali faced Craig won a decision at ADCC.
Okay, so this is why it's interesting, because they've all sort of got wins against each other.
Yeah.
And then they've all been competing recently, and some people have improved and some people have not as improved as quickly. I think the biggest strides have been taken by Meregali in Nogi.
Yeah.
But then you've still got that defeat against Craig lurking in the background. So really, like, I'd like to see Nicholas Meregali against Craig Jones.
Yeah, as well as a rematch with Kaynan and Meregali. But I think, yeah, those are the matches that would make the most sense.
And I think Meregali looked fantastic against Kaynan, but we've chatted before about whether Kaynan got fatigued in that match or whether he made a strategic error. So we'd like to see that run back. And then I think of the other guys, the one I want to see in the mix with all them is Victor Hugo, because I haven't seen Victor being given a real hard time by anyone in the no-gi, but he beat Nicky Rod, but he's not gone against, some of these guys that we're chatting about recently.
Yeah.
So
I think this is like a pretty big opportunity for one of these shows. I don't know how many of these athletes have got exclusive contracts now with either like Number One or Fight Pass. I know potentially Gordon's got an exclusive one with Fight Pass now. I don't know if that's the case for the others, but I think this is a big opportunity for like one of these small tournaments where they can crown the champion on the night and have some of these guys in that like smaller 4 to 8 man tournament.
So whether you do a tournament in one night or whether you pace these matches across a couple of shows, what I would suggest is for any of these promotions that have access to these athletes is book them in a way that makes sense. So you have some of these matches just sitting there waiting to happen, with storylines waiting to happen, waiting to be furthered. Don't mess this up. Give us Craig Jones against Meregali again. The story's there. The fans are wanting to see it happen. Don't mess about with it. What I'm really waiting for is Meregali to come out on top of all these matches and then go against Gordon. Hopefully that's the big storyline that's really happening as we go along. But I doubt it, but that would be sweet. Anyway, out of all those guys, who's the king in the absence of Gordon? I think we need to have a couple of matches just to make it definitive. And I think at the top end of that, we've got Craig Jones, Nicholas Meregali, Kaynan Duarte, and I'll throw in Victor Hugo to make it a 4. And if we have some matches between those guys, we'll get fantastic jiu-jitsu matches, and it'll engage the fans because that storyline will be furthered. And then when Gordon's ready to come back and get in the mix, we'll have some great matches waiting to happen. Now, as well as Fight Pass Invitational, there was quite a lot of other grappling going on. So I want to flag a couple of other events before we get into the Brazilian trials. And I want to do the Brazilian trials last because there was the first trials last weekend in Belo Horizonte. We've got the second trials this weekend in Sao Paulo. So before we get into discussion about both of them, let's just mention a couple other things that happened. So AIGA had their trials in Turkey, and they were won by Team Eurotrash, who Calum had identified before as not only being favourites for that, but possibly a team that could give the last champions, Team Rodolfo, a run for their money. Calum, did you see any of Eurotrash?
Yeah, so there was 3 rounds for these trials. I think they went 7-0 in the first, and then in the second and the third, I think they maybe went 6-1. So very dominant overall. Not much of a surprise given some of the other teams. I think we thought there was potentially a bit of a wild card team in the Dagestanis, considering like the overall grappling pedigree that comes out of Dagestan, and we obviously wouldn't be that familiar with a lot of those guys. But regardless, Eurotrash are still very dominant against them, and looking forward to seeing them in the, well, I don't know what they call it. Obviously, this was the trials. I don't know if it's AIGA Worlds. I think they've got that like $1 million prize on the line. So whenever that's taking place, definitely great to see Eurotrash in the mix for that.
Yeah, very strong team from Europe. Had the likes of Matty Szynski, Shea Montague, Jed Hughes, Sam McNally, Ash Williams. I'm going to try and list them all because I feel bad if I leave anyone out. So,
Ash, Matthias, Jed, Owen O'Flanagan, Larson, and then I think they had one other guy.
It wasn't used, I don't think, necessarily.
Yeah, I do know him. He's
I think
this guy from Orange from Apex, I think. But yeah, so
very strong team, and a heavy jiu-jitsu team, and it would be good to see them go up against Midolfo, who are obviously predominantly a jiu-jitsu team as well. We had GrappleFest in the UK, headlined by Keith Krikorian against Dominic Mahia. Dominic had beaten Keith previously, so Keith, defending champion in GrappleFest, was really gunning for the victory in this match and picked up a victory in an entertaining bout. I thought that was going to set up Keith well for the West Coast trials that are taking place at the end of this month, but I've not seen his name in the list at under 66 yet. I know he's in Europe and I know he's pretty active, so maybe he's just wanting to make sure he comes through his trip unscathed from injury before he enters the mix, because he's always a threat in the trials and has a pedigree, having previously won the West Coast trials, to do it again.
I think he's got that match now coming up with Owen Jones and Polaris, because Gabriel Souza's pulled out, so he's got that one to go before trials. So yeah, he's maybe just waiting till after that till he enters.
And Dominic came second in the division last time.
Beat Keith in the semis and then lost to Dorian in the finals.
So he'll be there or thereabout again. So it was definitely a match worth keeping tabs on for the impact it's going to have on the West Coast trials later this month. And then there was ADXC 3 in Brazil. Interesting event. Guys doing jiu-jitsu in gis in a cage in a round system. The standout performance of the night, I thought, was Hiron Gracie defeating Felipe Andrew, who's at the top end of gi jiu-jitsu, and Hiron's in his first year at black belt, previous world champion at brown belt, submitted him with a lovely judo throw / trip, took his back and won with a cross collar choke from the back. So very impressive performance. There was a lot of notable Brazilian competitors on the card, and that had an effect on the first trials that took place in Belo Horizonte, because these guys didn't enter the trials and took part in matches on this card. So that leads us on to talking about the trials that happened. Under 66, Kennedy Marseille came out on top, really by his top game, which I thought was far stronger than anyone else in the under 66 category. Loads of very good young competitors who move really, really well, but when they were put under pressure from Kennedy and his passing, they just they weren't able to keep him at bay. So he came through pretty handily. We saw some guys do well that we had flagged up before the event. So there was Kaya Gabriel, got to the final and was beaten by Kennedy. Igor Moreira, who I didn't know much about before, but he got bronze. Felipe Machado we'd flagged up before. He had a good run, but then he was beaten by Kalevi Pereira, who is a 15-year-old who competed no-gi while wearing his blue belt, I think in a nod to his luta livre background, or certainly the background of his coach, Melpi Galvao, because we've seen those guys train no-gi but with their belts on in the gym. There's a load of guys at under 66 from that gym that are incredible and very, very young. But for the next trials, Fabricio Andre has thrown his name into the mix. And you'd have to say, based on credentials, he would be likely to win that division despite the skill of the young guys that we saw in Belo Horizonte. So, Calum, what do you think of the under 66 division as it stands heading into this weekend?
Yeah, so interesting storyline there with Fabricio, considering Fabricio's recently left Melky's gym. So You would think, I think they kind of had the big three of Baby Shark, Mika, and Fabricio. Fabricio, one of the senior competitors from that gym, and then I'm sure he's very familiar with a lot of those other guys in the 66 kilo division. Maybe they haven't trained them a little bit, but I'm sure they know a little bit from training kind of how they feel like the match is going to go. Maybe some of the younger guys feel like in that time Fabricio's been away, they've closed the gap a little bit if there was a gap there in the first place. But yeah, definitely. Obviously, Fabricio has won trials before. He's went to ADCC. He's won his first match against Kolabati, but recently he's had some like quite ridiculous performances. Springing to mind the Polaris one, where he entered the absolute division for that, and he won some really impressive matches against the likes of Giancarlo and Owen Livesey. So his wrestling's looked really good, pretty much looked impossible to score on from the feet, just kind of springing up from any sort of attempt. So great rule set for him. He's looked really good recently. Definitely a big favourite in that division.
Right, so let's run through a couple of these divisions quickly, talking about what happened at the first trials and focusing on what's potentially going to happen at the second trial. Under 77, won by Luis Paulo Medeiros. Wasn't flagged up by us before the event, wasn't on my radar. Great all-round game. Some of the other notables in that division, Jefferson Pontes to silver, again, wasn't on my radar before, but is going to be a big threat this weekend. Two guys that we chatted about before were Majid Haig and Fabio Christian. They both performed well, and really looking forward to seeing them again. And also adding the name to the list is Jonatas Gracie, who at ADXC 3, hope you're still following all this, beat Levi Jones-Leary by decision. So he's in great form going into the event. So, Calum, who stands out amongst those names for you?
Yeah, good names there. Obviously, some of the guys that we weren't that familiar with that we could see do really well again. I think Jonatas, though, he's looked really good in the no-gi scene. I think he beat Levi in a close match at that past weekend, and then he's in guys like Oliver Taza as well. So I definitely think he's kind of a favour for that. Good overall game, good athlete. So I think he'll be one to watch in that division, definitely.
Shout out Majid, rocking the t-shirt and the shorts and playing a lot of deep half and half guard and variations of those positions. Great to see someone doing something different and having success with it. And he only lost a really close match by a penalty point. So he was looking really good before he got knocked out later on. So yeah, definitely would love to see him go quite far, especially because he's had a lot of trials recently where he's not won gold, but he's got to the podium. So to get over the line would be great for him. Under 88, we'd flagged up Pedro Mourinho, whose name was on the list for the first trials. Didn't compete because he had a match on Fight Pass Invitational, but he's in this time and is going to be a major threat with his ability to guillotine people. The previous trials, Charles Negremont won, 35 years old, first trials victory. Amazing to see someone a little bit more experienced finally get the win and make it to the finals. He beat Gabriel Almeida in the final, who we'd flagged as being a big threat to win. He looked great up until the final and only made like one little mistake that Charles took full advantage of in the final. So he's in good form. Charles also beat Izaki Bayensi earlier on in the day. He's in again, so that's another name to watch out for. And there's Andre Porfirio as well. So, Calum, any of those names in particular stand out to you?
Yeah, like we spoke about earlier on the podcast, I think Pedro is definitely the favourite in that one. Won trials a couple times before, but not had the greatest success at Worlds, but in other no-gi events he's had ridiculous success, getting double gold at Black Belt No-gi Worlds. Really big names like Craig Jones and others, so definitely think he's the favourite in that division. Good skill set for ADCC as well with the wrestling.
I'll keep firing names at you, but this is the beauty of the trials because it takes you into areas that you don't necessarily know loads about before, and then you start to learn about the athletes. So under 99 kilograms was won by Cassio Costa, a 24-year-old who trains with Victor Hugo at Six Blades. So he's definitely going to be one to keep tabs on going into the finals. Elio Braz took silver, so he'll be a threat again. And Patrick Gaudio's in for the second trials, and I think he'll be a major contender for that division. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. He's had some high-profile matches recently, obviously against Gordon in the IBJJF Absolute as well. Not had the best success in those, but they were against super high-level competition, so it'd be good to see him back out there, presumably winning a lot of matches against some of the lower-profile guys, and then we'll see how he does in the final against some of those guys that did well in the last ones and other good guys in that division.
Over 99 was won by Jose Ignacio dos Santos, beat Antonio Acef, who's back in for this one. And then we've got Victor Honorio, who, through injury, didn't face Acef later on in the tournament last weekend. So fingers crossed he's recovered from injury and is able to take his place in the division. I think if he does, it'll be between those two guys as to who takes the title. What do you think? Fair enough?
Yeah, agreed.
Good. And then we've got the women's divisions this time have the reward of making it to the finals. So the first trials, the women's divisions were just on the day who wins. That's it. Second trials, if you win your division, you get to go to Vegas. So we'll run through a couple of names to look out for. Under 55, we have Brenda Larissa, Jasmine Rocha, Ana Rodriguez, and one to look out for is Ana Queiroz, who won the under 65 kilogram bracket last week, dropping down to 55 this Saturday. But she trains at Melky Galvao's gym. So not only does Melky have a good group of young, lighter weight male athletes, there are females training there as well that are going to be a serious threat to trials. But Calum, any of those names in particular you're going to be looking out for?
Yeah, Jasmine Roach has looked really good on the no-gi scene recently, so looking forward to watching her.
Under 65 kilograms, I think two to look out for are Ana Carolina Vieira and Gabby McComb, two seasoned campaigners. I think they're likely to come through on the day, although there's Heine Fragoso, who got silver at the last trials, also in the mix. But I think a final between Ana Carolina and Gabby would be likely. What do you think, Calum?
Yeah, I think that's probably the likely final two. Looking forward to seeing Ana Carolina Barrera. Always look forward to watching her matches.
Yeah, I've not seen her in a while competitively, but yeah, been a real force in the past. So I would say if she's anywhere like she's competed before, she'll be very difficult to beat. And then over 65, this division, I don't have a great handle on. I mean, the Gabby Garcia's not going to show up and do trials. So Maria Rifato did really well last week in the over 65 division. So she's been suggested as likely to win it again. I'll go along with the experts who've picked her and say, yes, I think she'll win it again. Calum agrees.
Yep.
So we'll have a good look at the South American second trials and try and bring you any thoughts that we have on not only winners, but how they won, exciting matches that took place, etc. Thankfully, this weekend, the load is a little bit lighter. It's a little bit easier for the viewer to get through the grappling that's taking place. We also don't have Sting's last match in AEW, nor do we have Will Ospreay's debut. So, we had all these things going on last weekend that had to be watched. So, it'll be a bit easier this weekend. So, like, subscribe, follow. You'll get our review of the second South American trials, hopefully early next week. And then our interview with William Tackett will be out in the near future.